talk during the segment, but it always gets cut off anyway, so it doesn't matter. All right, welcome back to another Box Score Geek show. Holy cow. If you told me you saw the Denver Nuggets winning, I don't believe you. It is, however, why we are recording on Wednesday and also why we have our special guest. Again, Chris, at this point, we could just give you guest star billing on the podcast, which is amazing. Spoiling the lead, Chris Ye of the Chris Ye podcast himself, co-author of the New York Times bestsellers Blitzscaling and The Alliance. Say hey, Chris.
Hey, Dre, it's always great to be back. And by the ghosts of Alex English, the Denver Nuggets are in the Western Conference Finals.
Yeah, as always, we are produced by our own producer, voice of God, man of many hats, Brian Foster, who normally co-hosts. But I think if you do your normal MO, Brian, you will probably not talk a lot unless we bait you into talking. And as the Golden State Warriors are nowhere to be found in this year's playoffs, I don't think that'll be a problem. Say hey, Brian.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I'll just sit here with my tail between my legs and let you guys talk Nuggets and Lakers because that's all I want to hear about these days anyway. And I'm a big Alex English fan too, so good times.
Yeah, so for those that are unaware, although longtime listeners to the show will know fully, Chris is I would say the best Lakers fan. We've given you this compliment before, Chris. You are the best fan in many ways. Maybe Jay Brett has you beat. We'll comment on him in a second because he showed up in the comments. But essentially, you know Lakers history, current Lakers, the gossip. That's always fun to have you on because you keep your ear to the ground and you know stuff there. At one point you had a dog named Kobe, so I think it's fair to say you are the ultimate Lakers fan. And I'm a pretty big Nuggets fan, and with shock, I'm happy something that happened came true. I'm going to admit something to you here, Chris. The Nuggets get out of the first round by the skin of their teeth. And the first thing I do is I message you and I say, I hope, I think what I've been saying is the best the Nuggets have ever looked, which is in 1985 and 2009. They made it to the Western Conference Finals and were knocked out by the Lakers. So I've kind of joked that the Nuggets only hope to make a finals is in a playoffs where they don't have to go through the Lakers. I didn't realize they were playing the Clippers. I thought they were playing the Lakers in round two. So I messaged you and said, here's hoping the Nuggets, can beat the curse of the Lakers. And then you responded astutely, correctly. Well, they have to go through the Clippers first, but we'll see. And so I kind of just had to, pretend that I meant that. And I was like, oh, of course they're going to beat the Clippers. And then immediately that looked like the stupidest thing anybody has ever said. And yet, Chris, here we are. Yep. My initial comment is true. The Nuggets and the Lakers are playing. And as I know, I've noted already on the show, on Twitter many times, this is annoying as hell because this now marks the third time in NBA history where the Nuggets have to go through a powerhouse Lakers with one of the best guards and one of the best centers. Your mileage may vary on how to rate these. Magic Johnson and Kareem in 1985. I believe Kareem went on to win Finals MVP in '85. I may be mistaken.
That's
And
correct. Kareem
Kobe
won the
Bryant and
Finals
Pau
MVP
Gasol.
in 1985.
Yeah, and again, record for those that aren't aware, even though we've brought it up many times. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar still holds a distinction of having the widest window between his first Finals MVP and his last Finals MVP. A record, I think it's like 14 years, so it's a record that will likely never be touched. Although who's to say if LeBron James is still playing in 5 or 6 years? Because I think his first Finals MVP was 12. So if LeBron James is still playing in 2006 or 26, there's a shot. But then it also the Nuggets against Kobe and Pau Gasol. Kobe Bryant went on to win Finals MVP that year, although it was really Pau Gasol's. But whatever. Yeah, so here we are again, and if history repeats itself, LeBron James plus Anthony Davis, one of those two is going on to Finals MVP.
Well, if it is any consolation to you, Dre, there are a lot of franchises who have always seen their path to the NBA Finals blocked by the Lakers. The NBA has been around for 60 seasons and counting, and 31 of those seasons have ended with the Lakers in the finals.
And I think someone noted that if the Lakers or the Celtics make the finals this year, it will be like more final. I think you're saying 31, so it probably qualifies as well.
Yeah.
I think the reason it might not qualify is due to if they're counting the Minneapolis Lakers. But
Well, we
basically,
always count the Minneapolis Lakers. George Mikan is an icon of the franchise.
But that just being the question, someone was making that note too that if the Celtics or Lakers make the finals, we will have had more finals with the Celtics or Lakers in them. I think they said meant Celtics or Los Angeles Lakers than without, which is a ridiculous feat.
Well, don't forget George Mikan also had the great Vern Mickelson on his side.
I don't even remember that at all, even being a fan of history.
Jim Pollard, the Kangaroo Kid, all fantastic Minneapolis Lakers, bleeding true purple and gold.
Awesome. All right. I mean, it is one of the most amusing things being out in the Midwest. Two parts about the Lakers moniker. The first being it's hilarious that the California team kept the land of a thousand lakes name Lakers. The only one being more ridiculous is Utah keeping the Jazz from New Orleans. But the other part being, I'm in Wisconsin, right next to Minnesota. Big rivalries, especially in football. Go Pack, go! They took down the Minnesota Vikings in Week 1. But what I was going to say is, Wisconsin has a ton of lakes too. We just don't see the need to brag about it or classify like little ponds as lakes. Just saying.
You don't have a lake named Lake Superior there like Minnesota does, Dre?
I don't know if we touched that one. I know we touched Lake Michigan, and I've been to that many times. And I think the only what is it Huron? I've been to Huron. I think the one that touches Cleveland is the only one I haven't. Only Great Lake I haven't been to.
Well, what you can do is you can dig a pond in your backyard and call it Lake Ultra Maximus.
Yeah, that would be a good idea. I like it. Okay. So anyway, basically format of the show we're going to do this week. Of course, we're going to wrap up round 2 of the NBA playoffs, because that was why we waited to talk and we're going to discuss it. We are going to, of course, give our predictions on the conference finals. And then first, we are going to go over some user comments. Chris, I've got to just imagine you were busy because we didn't bait you. And we basically did do a write out. So you didn't even have to listen to the podcast last week, but we went to a topic that is near and dear to your heart: big what ifs in NBA history. And shocker, a lot of them ended up being related to the Los Angeles Lakers in some capacity, or more accurately, we left some important ones off. For instance, the Chris Paul no trade did not make the list. But as I already mentioned, other Lakers ultimate fan, Jay Gunter Brett, did pop in. So I figured we'd go over the comments on this. For those that don't know, we had a game show, something we're going to have you on, Chris, because you are the game show master. I got to give a shout out to your own podcast, the Chris Ye podcast. If you don't listen, it's fantastic stuff. You've been turning out amazing content during the pandemic. One of your most recent episodes was with Tim Taylor, not the Tim Taylor, but another amazing Tim Taylor. And at one point in the show, he said something like, if I had one person a friend I had to use in a trivia game, I'd pick you, Chris. And to be kind of flippant, I was listening to this show and I like rolled my eyes and I was like, that's like saying if I had one person to finish out a game, it'd be Michael Jordan or LeBron James. I'm like, yeah, your friend that won on a national stage, for those that don't know, Chris Ye is a mental samurai. Yeah, I was laughing my head off when that came up. So you're a huge game person. So at some point we might have to have you on for a game of analytics pickup, a new show we've been doing where we throw out a topic idea and we go back and forth kind of picking ideas out.
I've been listening loyally and faithfully. I must admit, I don't quite understand all the rules, but I'm happy to try.
And I'll admit, for those that have been listening to it, it isn't a super official game because, of course, I've changed up the format a few times. I think the first time Greg and I each had 10 and we whittled it down to 5. But the simple idea is we throw up a concept and we just go back and forth and throw ones, and then when we're done, we kind of rank them together. And last week's topic was big what ifs in NBA history. And as I mentioned, the Lakers themselves have a lot of big ones there. And so let's go over the comments. So the first one was from KUH, was asking about if Masai had been able to draft Giannis. In the comments, another commenter. So I'm gonna condense some of these comments and not necessarily read them all out because there were 9 good jobs and some big ones. But Rebound and Threes noted that Masai didn't really want Giannis that much because he could have made a compelling offer for a 15th pick in the NBA draft. And I think it is fair to say that there is always revisionist history. People do like players in the draft, but they don't see them coming. So when they say, I really wanted Giannis, it's like I offered 2 second rounders and a decent player. It's not, I knew he was going to be a back-to-back MVP player, so I offered the farm for him. But that would have been interesting if Giannis had ended up on Toronto in 2013.
That is quite remarkable. I'm looking at the comments now, and I guess obviously there were a lot of people other than Toronto who could have drafted Giannis since he went with the 15th pick. And you were saying, and I thought this was quite remarkable, if OKC had drafted Giannis and had Giannis, KD, and Westbrook, that would have been a hell of a team.
Yes. And I mean, that's always a funny one too. As soon as the biggest name in that bin, right, is our own player that we'll be talking a ton more in the show is Nikola Jokic, who went in the second round. That and there, I think being the best. I'm going to put gun to your head, Chris, and ask you a hard question.
Mm.
So Nikola Jokic is being described as the best passing big since Wilt. And I'm seeing some nerds come out of the woodwork, and I don't know where I fall on this, that say actually he's a better passing big than Wilt because Wilt would play 48 minutes a game, whereas Jokic plays less. So if you look at possessions, Jokic better passing big than Wilt. For those that don't remember, Wilt Chamberlain, a center, once led the NBA in total assists.
Yes, and remarkably enough, Wilt also led the NBA in field goal percentage that season at 72.7%.
Which is, if he could just have shot free throws, it would have been something.
He was a remarkable player. But I would have to agree. Again, I never saw Wilt play in person. I've seen film on television from time to time. I'm sure you've seen it as well, but it's standard definition, very fuzzy. But the way Jokic plays, his incredible passing ability, I mean, just in game 7 last night, some of the things he did were so remarkable. I mean, it is absolutely astonishing. And it also demonstrates, we've talked before about how having a big point guard is a cheat code. And that's one of the reasons why Magic Johnson was so remarkably effective. Well, having a point center is also a cheat code. It's just it almost never happens. But with Jokic, it really does. I mean, I remember there was a play, you probably remember during the game, when he has the double team and he basically just fakes a couple of passes until they're out of position and slips it to someone for an open dunk. And it's just, that's Magic Johnson level stuff right there, manipulating the defense, having the patience, and getting people open layups.
Yeah, there's a comment. Oh, sorry,
Dre.
I was just going to say there is a comment from the analyst who is one of the Van Gundys, maybe Jeff, who said basically he was talking to Greg Popovich about guarding Jokic in international play. And he said Popovich thought the double team is a mistake. Jokic is way too good of a passer, and you can only double team him if it's from the blind side where he doesn't see it coming.
And that's what's super amusing about Jokic is with most bigs, will hurt you, Chris, but we'll bring up Kwame Brown, who I think you've described him as having hands of stone, right? Just couldn't keep hold of the
great
ball.
one-on-one post defender, hands of stone.
Because that's the problem with a lot of bigs. They try and get close to the hoop. If you get them the ball, then you trap them, and then they get a turnover. Whereas with Jokic, you get him close to the hoop, he doesn't have a good shot, or he takes he was taking Dirk Nowitzki shots where he's just like on one leg doing a hook shot and it would go in. It was ridiculous. I saw some flippant comments that I was enjoying. I think in Game 6 that are just like, oh yeah, you're down 14 points in an elimination game and you just start playing horse shots. Why not?
Well, he is one of my favorite non-Laker players. I love watching Jokic. I love the fact that people make fun of him. We've talked about this before. People say Jokic isn't athletic. Of course he's athletic, but he does not run particularly fast. He does not jump particularly high. And he looks a little awkward when he moves. And so people don't think of him as athletic. But of course, his footwork, his court vision, his hand-eye coordination are all quite remarkable and probably better than even 99% of the other players in his position in the NBA.
Did you see my flippant comment about that, Chris? I said at this point, Jokic is at such a high caliber of center in the NBA that it is a foregone conclusion using Bayesian math that he will end up on the Lakers.
I didn't see that, but that is absolutely true. When in doubt, if there is a great center, he will end up on the Lakers and he will end up winning championships.
And yeah, Anthony Davis is in theory next in line. All right, let's hit a few more of these comments. So Jay Gunter Brett, as I noticed, brought up, of course, one of the most infamous no trades. I think this almost made the list, but neither Greg or I picked it, which was there was a point where the Oklahoma City Thunder almost traded for Tyson Chandler before getting rid of James Harden. Of course, they don't. They void the trade for Tyson Chandler, lose to the Lakers in the playoffs, and then pick up Kendrick Perkins, who causes them not advertently. It's not like Kendrick Perkins says, I refuse to play with James Harden, but because they paid Kendrick Perkins $9 million a season, and are in a small market, a device of their own making. So we give them no sympathy for this. Clay Bennett moved the team from Seattle to OKC. So him arguing that he's in a small market is a ridiculous argument. But he ends up jettisoning James Harden over back of the napkin math we've calculated is about 4 million. But had they picked up Tyson Chandler, who went on to win a title with the Mavericks, knocking out the Los Angeles Lakers, and then later doing really well on the Knicks, that could have been something. So that was a good one. If he goes to this one, Chris, I'm curious if you have any opinions. He says, "What if the Lakers had been able to win the coin flip in 1975?" So this is even pre box score geeks numbers because the full box score for the NBA is not in effect until 78, and says, what if they were able to lure David Thompson away from the Nuggets to play for the Lakers in the mid 70s?
Oh, that would have been quite remarkable as well. Now, you may remember that mid 1970s Lakers team featured Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. He didn't have a lot of help. He basically dragged them into the playoffs every year. Remarkable numbers, even prior to the box score geeks, the box score era. It's a shame because he would have been absolutely astonishing as a player if we were able to calculate his wins produced. But yeah, he really could have used help. And David Thompson, of course, a high flying, high scoring player, possibly would have been a good compliment. Now, did the Nuggets ever win big with David Thompson? Did anyone ever win big with David Thompson? I don't know.
The Nuggets got so close in the ABA finals and were defeated by Dr. J. Shocker.
What are you going to do?
All right, some other fun ones. Koka's wanting to draft Doncic instead of Aiton to go to the Suns. That could have been interesting. Asks about Popovich with the Spurs. Some other good what ifs. So I'm going to give a huge shout out to those. Thank you very much to Rebound and Threes. Patrick asks if the Grizzlies had won the 2003 lottery and gotten LeBron. That would have been interesting, but that would have been horrible for NBA history. Jay Gunter Brett, something that Greg brought up that just incenses many people is that Bill Russell went to the Celtics because the Royals, who later ended up with Oscar Robertson, didn't think he was going to play for them. And then St. Louis Hawks, maybe, or something, ended up trading the rights to Bill Russell for tickets to the Ice Capades, essentially. So, for people that are fans of the current Sacramento Kings, who were at one point the Royals, it's in their blood. They just screwing things up and doing horribly. They could have had Oscar Robertson and Bill Russell in the 1960s in an 8-team league and just wreaked havoc, and they didn't. And then, of course, the one big one, Chris, that I guess I'll let you comment on is, and you've commented on it before, is I brought up the Ralph Sampson no trade, where the Clippers and Lakers, Jerry Buss almost gave away the farm to try and get the draft rights to Ralph Sampson and didn't, and instead ended up with James Worthy, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar coming back, and having to essentially moneyball the position with people like AC Green and how am I messing his name? Horn rim glasses. Come on,
Kurt Rambis.
Kurt Rambis. Oh my
Rambis
goodness.
was around before then, but yes, Rambis joined the Lakers early on in the early 1980s.
But essentially the point being, had they gotten Sampson, they might have cleared the cupboard or let some of those players go.
Yeah.
But because they didn't get Sampson, they were like, I guess we're keeping these other players, and they did spectacularly. But just for perspective, for those that don't know, um, Buss offered $5 million for the rights, and this was in a time where the average NBA salary was like $200,000. So he offered 10% of the league. Imagine at this point offering, say, $60 million for the draft rights to who's a mediocre center in the league right now. I don't know. And a team saying no to it. So that essentially happened. So of course the Lakers fan did get upset by upset / happy, more like, oh my goodness, how could the Clippers be that inept? Which nothing new.
Donald Sterling. That's the only answer you need. Donald Sterling.
All right. Let's get on with the actual meat of the show. I think we kind of missed it in the middle here, but I gotta give shout outs to Donovan Mitchell. And I was laughing at you and me, Chris. Donovan Mitchell put up the most points in a first round series. For those that don't know the cheat code and why he gets away with this, but he still deserves credit. I'm basically saying he's currently number one on the list. In reality, he's probably number 5 or number 6. Is that the NBA used to have either bye rounds for number 1 seeds, they didn't play in the first round, or best of 5. So the fact of the matter is, a lot of Michael Jordan's career's first round series were best of 5, and Donovan Mitchell got 7 games, which not all people did. But Donovan Mitchell put up the most points in a first round series in NBA history. He did it shooting amazingly, Brian, right? It's over 60% true shooting. Played spectacularly. It's one of these funny things where, as a rookie, people were comparing Donovan Mitchell's scoring numbers when he was getting like 20 points per game on 20 shots per game. They were comparing him to Michael Jordan. For those that don't know, Michael Jordan would score like 30 points a game on 20 shots a game. So it was ridiculous. He put up Michael Jordan numbers. The Utah Jazz outscored the Denver Nuggets. The Utah Jazz were up 3-1 on the Denver Nuggets, and somehow the Denver Nuggets won. I got to give props there. And what I was joking before the show, Chris, to you and I, is I've been an ardent Donovan Mitchell hater. You're much better than me. You don't go on full on hate, but you have been mocking me for about 2 seasons for the Nuggets spending so much money on Jamal Murray. And in that first series, Donovan Mitchell and Jamal Murray were just trading 50-point games back and forth. And I was kind of like, I'm just going to be quiet and hope nobody calls me on this.
They are fun to watch. And again, the reason I don't take the heat on Donovan Mitchell that you do is I'm wise enough to know that the Utah fans are rabid maniacs and I don't want to poke them in their den. They are crazy, absolutely crazy. They have no other sports, so they care about the Jazz way too much. But Donovan Mitchell did perform incredibly well in this year's playoffs. Jamal Murray has performed really well in this year's playoffs. We'll get to the part later on where I'll argue that Alex Caruso is a better player than Jamal Murray. That will be a good one for the aggregators. But yeah, let's give them their due respect. Incredible play for Donovan Mitchell in the first round. Incredible play for Jamal Murray in the first and second round of these playoffs.
Well, it's yeah, and I just basically we didn't talk a ton of the first round of the NBA playoffs. I think just missed some and then did the game, but had to make sure I gave that shout out. And in some ways, I've kind of expressed it makes life easier for me because at this point, I'm like, if they want to give him the full money for that series, absolutely go for it. I've got no complaints. And it's funny your point on Utah Jazz fans. It was a shocker to me because I've been a Lakers hater for a long time, right? It's a much different world now, but one of my claims to fame used to be calling Kobe Bryant overrated. Stressor on that. It was never that I didn't say Kobe Bryant was great, and in fact, to the consternation of our producer Brian, oftentimes I probably rate Kobe Bryant higher than he will because I will do things like look at longevity and Olympics and playoff play and finals play and say when you package that all together, you get an all-time great player, and you get that even without that. Even I want that stressed.
Yeah.
Probably at the time of his retirement, he was a top 20 to 50 player all time in NBA history. He'll go down a little because contemporary players, but I gave him his due, but I called him overrated. And of course, the world has changed as to how much I care about that anymore for obvious reasons. But the amount of hate I got from Jazz fans after a decade of being known as a Kobe Bryant hater and people knowing that the Lakers fan base is just ravenous really did shock me. And I was really, really surprised. I guess it's worth knowing, and this as a Lakers fan, like this is the fan base that booed Derek Fisher, who admittedly I can see complete justification from just saying I would rather play for the Lakers than the Jazz, but essentially had, as I understand it, right, a sick daughter who needed treatment and said the doctors in Los Angeles or New York were better than in Utah, so he wanted to be traded to one of those two teams. The Jazz front office relented, as I understand, and very nice thing, traded him to the Lakers, and then he was getting booed by Jazz fans when the Jazz and Lakers would play, which is something.
Yeah. Now, Derek Fisher's daughter had retinoblastoma, so eye cancer. I mean, this is some serious stuff. This is some terrifying stuff for a parent. You're a parent, I'm a parent, we know this. And obviously, under those circumstances, you would want the best surgeons in the world operating on your child. You want the best care in the world. And again, it was convenient that it allowed him to go to the Lakers and win 2 more championships, but it seems a little unclassy to boo him.
Absolutely, I would agree with that. So yeah, I think we agree on that point. But yeah, do want to give the dues. So let's go through round two. I'm gonna try and go least. I'll put the Lakers and the Nuggets at the last. Boston Toronto was kind of remarkable in how long it went. Right, I saw some people claiming there might have been ref meddling, which is a topic for another day. The one subject I want to give, and I actually am curious how worried you are about this, Chris, is we've noted that the Celtics for a couple years now have actually been one of the best teams out east with one of the least top heavy best teams, if that makes any sense. And kind of a known thing in NBA history is that you need a star to win in the finals. And it's possible at some point in the future this is no longer true. But if you look at the modern NBA history, like basically 1978 on, I think no team that won a title, except if maybe you count, I think Wes Unseld with the Bullets, because I think he was a little older in the late 70s, qualifies. And I don't think any team except the 1999 New York Knicks with Marcus Camby made a finals without what we would consider a star player. So we're not talking like all-star player, Steve Francis-ish player who gets 25 points per game, Bradley Beal like player who gets 30 points a game, but is really just an okay player, not a great player. We are talking does everything, LeBron James, yes, even Kobe at his peak style player. And the Celtics have not really had a player like that even this year. He was good but not great, Jason Tatum. But it appears, to that Marcus Camby point, we've used this principle before. We call it the Marcus Camby butterfly effect, which is Marcus Camby did turn into a star player, and essentially his chrysalis seemed to happen in the '99 playoffs. He basically transformed into a star in that playoffs, got that team to the finals. And then, of course, the Spurs are just, as LeBron James is aware, the Spurs are obnoxious and can crush you. Um, Jason Tatum might be doing that in this year's playoffs. Are you scared of Tatum in the finals if the Celtics take that series?
So the short answer is no, and I'll explain. But first, let me note that the Celtics do actually have a star player, at least based on rate. They just don't play him very much, and his name is Enes Kanter.
And he's not, I mean, I've been seeing in the playoffs him getting benched and stuff. Classic argument we've heard, classic argument I heard for years about Nikola Jokic, which is, oh, this player, he's a sieve on defense. He can't do enough. And it's, I made a joke at one point when I said that the Denver Nuggets with Damian Lillard, we'd be happy to have Damian Lillard because someone said they wanted to see Damian Lillard with a player like Jokic. And my flippant reply is, hell, the Nuggets would be happy to take Damian Lillard off your hands. And they said something like, I've never thought of a worse pick and roll defense. And I said, 100% true shooting efficiency on offense is a pretty good pick and roll defense.
Hey, maybe the Nuggets can trade Jamal Murray for Damian Lillard.
I think it's one of those. I have no idea what's happening, and what I'm going to do is the exact same optimism when you first started needling me about that, Chris. As I kind of said, he's a young player, saying all the things I make fun of people for saying, right, Chris? He's a young player. We've seen his upside. Maybe he'll turn into a star, and maybe this again, same Marcus Camby butterfly effect. Maybe this playoff list is coming out, and he's just going to be a star going forward.
It always could happen. I will also say that since we talked a little about Lakers fans, Lakers fans are constantly saying things like, well, what if we traded Kyle Kuzma and Danny Green in a second round pick for Giannis? Who says no?
Although I actually did write that article at one point. I forget what I called it, but I noted that for Boston fans and Laker fans, typical fans view them as delusional for comments like that. Of course, when we look over your history, we see things like, by the way, Chris, you may be one of the only people who would get this trivia question right. Do you remember who they traded for Kareem Abdul-Jabbar?
So it was, let's see, it was a Junior Bridgman, and I believe it was It was centered around Junior Bridgman and David Myers, I think.
That might be right. I don't even have it up in front of me. I just know I've looked that up before.
Trust me, it was a ripoff. The Lakers. I mean, there's no way that you can get fair value for Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and they didn't even get an All-Star in return.
Yeah, they got nothing. And then of course one of the most infamous ones, Pau Gasol for Kwame Brown. And I still argue it was just absolute luck that Mark Gasol turned into what, because it was a second rounder. It was to make it work. Like if you want the rights to a team's second round pick, you can get that. You can offer them $2 million in cash or something and a future second round pick, and they will agree in a heartbeat. The Nuggets
Well,
used to
let's
do this
not
all
forget the Lakers also had to give them Aaron McKee to make the salaries match up, who had been retired and was coaching basketball at that point in time, and future imprisoned felon Javaris Crittenden.
Jeez. All right. So I mean, it's a funny thing is Lakers say stuff like that, and we laugh, and then you just again, I go by Bayesian logic. I'm like, just look at their history. And I mean, even Anthony Davis, this was one of the closest, I've ever seen a deal like that come to working out with Lonzo Ball, and I've already forgotten his name, Hart.
Josh Hart.
Those
Yep,
two are
and
good
Brandon
players,
Ingram.
but it's
Those
just
are good
like,
players. It was a pretty good deal, and they got a bunch of draft picks, which hopefully will be worthless. But yeah, it's just impossible when you're trading a player like Anthony Davis. You never get sufficient return. There's very few cases in history where you traded a superstar in his prime and actually got a sufficient return. I think there's zero cases of that working.
and yeah, apologies to that question though. Your thoughts on if you have to fear Jason Tatum, and what are your
Yes.
thoughts if Boston comes out of the East the winner?
So the first thing is I don't fear Jason Tatum because the Lakers are well equipped to actually defend a player like that. So the thing about Jason Tatum is excellent skilled player. He was above average this season. He was actually really good as a rookie, and he looks fantastic at times. Although he looked great getting ready to throw that dunk down on Bam Adebayo, who then threw it back in his face. But the Lakers actually have sufficient players to guard him. The guys that they have trouble guarding are guys like Kawhi, who are really strong. Tatum is not strong enough, so they can handle him with a combination of Danny Green and Kyle Kuzma. Danny Green and Kyle Kuzma are really good at handling people who are relatively quick, but not the people who can just blow through them. The Lakers had tried, for example, some of the most embarrassing losses to the Clippers this season happened because they couldn't guard Kawhi. They would throw somebody like KCP out there on Kawhi, and it would just be no contest. Kawhi would shoot 1,000% because he would just go straight through the guys. So Tatum is not strong enough yet. Maybe if he bulks up, puts on another 20 pounds, he'll get there. But right now, he's like LeBron in 2003, not LeBron of today.
And I do have to give another part of that series that I want to give credit to. Sorry to just wrap that series before we go on to Miami Milwaukee. Is I made this comment on Twitter that Kyle Lowry, like, come on, we've all known he's Hall of Fame for a long time. I would hope this playoff run, almost running it back right with a team without Kawhi. And I saw someone make a stupid comment on that where they said every team that Kawhi has left made the playoffs. Every team that he's joined made the playoffs the year before he joined them and the year after he left them. And I just was like, that doesn't mean anything. It just means that it's hard to win in the NBA, and Kawhi is that star that puts you over the edge. But Kyle Lowry as the anchor of that team running it back. I don't know how much we'll talk all NBA, Brian, but Kyle Lowry being left off of the all NBA team with Pascal making it is just ridiculous. But
Well,
Kyle
the
Lowry had an amazing.
All NBA team list is out. There's the topic. We're done.
There's the topic. And Pascal, last name that I always mess up, made the second
Siakam.
team. And
Siakam.
Siakam and Kyle Lowry was left off the list. Well, Russell Westbrook, who we love, it's a weird version of hell where Russell Westbrook was another player, right? He's just like Jamal Murray, Chris, where he was overrated initially and is going to turn into an MVP caliber player. We agree Russell Westbrook was MVP caliber. We also agree that he's in his 30s and he came back off an injury in the middle of a bubble pandemic after taking 4 months off of basketball and did not look like himself.
Well,
But
let's put it this way. A great comparable for Russell Westbrook is Dwayne Wade, a great player. But when he was playing, I can't remember how many times I said it. I'm like, the instant his athleticism starts to go, he is done. He does not have a jump shot. He does not have the ability to continue doing this once his athleticism starts to go. And with Dwayne Wade, the decline was shocking and swift.
yeah, I mean, I remember when LeBron James made that comment about, not five, not six, not seven, or whatever. I looked at those numbers and essentially, yeah, Chris Bosh, Dwayne Wade, LeBron James from the year before absolutely looked great. I feel bad for Chris Bosh. He was the odd man out, right? Because as you're noting with athleticism, Dwayne Wade wasn't a perimeter player. He was a drive at the hoop. Exactly what you're saying you're afraid of, right? He was a player that could just overpower you and get to the hoop. Um, and so Chris Bosh kind of was the odd man out, but LeBron James and Wade were amazing. But basically, Braun got 1.5 seasons of healthy Wade. And then after that, he just was not as good. And you feel for Wade when LeBron James because Wade left money on the table for LeBron James to come back, and Bron was like, "I'm gonna go play with Kyrie Irving and Kevin Love. Sorry, Wade, you're past your prime."
So here are the wins produced totals for Dwayne Wade.
Oh, I love this. I've seen this before.
First year with LeBron, 13.9 wins. Second year, 13.5 wins. Third year, 7.6. He was injured a lot of the time. Fourth year, 10.9 wins. And then the final year with Miami, 2014, 6.7 wins. Now, Dwayne Wade's win totals after that: 4, 3.2, 1.5, negative 0.6, 2.2. Off the cliff.
We do have to give him credit for how much he got paid for those seasons, though. Braun made sure the Clippers, or not the Clippers, the Cavaliers got him a shot, and then, of course, for whatever reason, Chicago decided this will lead us into our next series quite well. Chicago decided with in his prime Jimmy Butler to pay $25 million to Dwayne Wade, who was not worth it. And then,
Jimmy
like I said,
Butler, another guy who I'm afraid his career will go down swiftly once he begins to lose his athleticism.
Really interesting. I would agree with that because he's not a great perimeter shooter. And then just to finish the Lowry point, also another just chef's kiss that I have to give credit to before we move on. That last second pass over Takeo Falls was ridiculous. Look it up if you haven't. It's one of the most amazing plays. Kyle Lowry had a hell of a season, hell of a series. Just easy enough to say. Of course he should get a statue in Toronto, and of course he should be Hall of Fame first ballot. I hope the NBA does not make a mistake there.
Now, a couple more fun trivia questions from Boxscore Geeks. I have it up. You don't have it up. And I know you don't have a tablet to look it up, so you're going to have to guess.
We'll see how fast I can go on my phone, but go for it.
So, guess where Pascal Siakam ranks in terms of wins produced on the members of this year's Toronto Raptors. What rank is he? First, second, third, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
I'll go 5. I'll go 5.
That was my guess as well.
Pascal Siakam is the 8th most productive Raptor this year. Do you know who the leading win producer was?
Is it Lowry?
It is not.
Really? It's Anunoby, right?
It is Anunoby. OG Anunoby is the leading wins producer, followed by Kyle Lowry, Fred VanVleet, Norman Powell, Rondae Hollis-Jefferson, Terrence Davis, Chris Boucher, and then Pascal Siakam. All the players above Siakam, by the way, were above average players, which is one of the reasons why Toronto was so good.
Very balanced team.
The one argument I've heard people make, which I might agree with a little, but still would like to use this as a point to reinforce why it's not a great one, is people say, he's a lockdown defender. And that may be true, but I think people often overestimate how much you have to make up being a great defender if he's below average as a power forward. It's one of those where this makes any sense. Mathematically, we don't know the exact amount a player impacts on defense. And that's a really, really hard problem that I just don't believe is easy to figure out, because a lot of it is actually scheme and how the team works together. And then how are you supposed to distribute credit on that? And I don't believe people that just watch the game, on their tablets on League Pass know. But we do know the magnitude. We can tell you, like, for any given team, their defensive prowess is worth between like 5 and 10 wins in an 82 game series. And so it's possible that Pascal is responsible for all 10 of those or all 5 of those or wherever the Raptors fall there, because I do believe they're above average defensive team. Unlikely, seeing as he plays with 4 teammates and doesn't play the full 48 minutes. But it's a lot of ground to make up. I mean, we've made this point about a lot of players that are very skilled. Klay Thompson's one of our go-tos as well, which is to say they just don't do enough things well that even if you give them a huge benefit out of the doubt on the defense, they're good players. They're above average players. They're not star players. And we can probably say that Pascal. Whereas, and Kyle Lowry is an interesting one where I would say he's probably never been a top 5, top 10 NBA player, but he reminds me of a slightly better Andre Miller, who is just this player that year in, year out is a great player, a great point guard, plays very well, does everything you need to win. And that was true. And I give ourselves some credit. We made fun of Daryl Morey back in the day when he traded him for nothing to the Raptors.
And by the way, at one point in time, the Lakers were looking at signing Kyle Lowry. This was way, way back in those ancient days. And I sure wish they did. I remember looking at it at the time and saying, please, please, please let them sign Kyle Lowry.
Who'd they end up with instead? Was it Fisher or was someone else?
I don't even remember at this point. I just remember that they were looking at him. This was in that sort of 2006, 2007 timeframe.
Yeah, and I mean he's another one of these players, very much like Chauncey Billups with the Pistons back in the day, where I think he was at like 6 mil a season for 4 or 5 years with the
Yeah.
Raptors. He went for nothing back in the day. Of course, he's on a better contract now, but that was ridiculous. Any other trivia facts before we go on to Miami versus Milwaukee?
No, let us do that.
I am very conflicted on this series for a variety of reasons. Of course, I said this before, and I hold to it. The Milwaukee Bucks boycotting a game, or Wildcat Strike, right, is what it's called, a
Mm-hmm.
game on protest. Man, how am I dropping the name? There's so many police deaths where the names all start running together. But in
Jacob.
Kenosha,
So it was the shooting, not the death of Jacob Blake in
oh yeah,
Kenosha,
he
Wisconsin.
survived being shot 7 times in the back, which is,
Yeah.
and that was in, that's in my backyard, unfortunately, in Kenosha, Wisconsin. And they did a wildcat strike and also put pressure on the Wisconsin legislature to meet to discuss it. Sad, sad reality of Wisconsin, and I say this as a Wisconsin resident. Because of gerrymandering, we have a Republican-led legislature, although we do have a Democratic governor who won by the skin of his teeth. I did vote for him, so I'm very glad Tony Evers is in charge. And I'm going to say this on air. Hope it doesn't get me in too much trouble. We were joking about that before, Chris, but like they're worthless, and it is maddening to have to deal with them because the Milwaukee Bucks did this wildcat strike, tried to put pressure on the legislature to meet. They did convene to meet to discuss police violence, and then they didn't show and canceled after 30 seconds. But I did say, regardless of what happens in the playoffs, that was the play of the game for the playoffs to me. And regardless of what happens, the Milwaukee Bucks are my champions this year. So I'll still give that to them. I said that, of course, before I expected them to basically get washed out by the Heat. But that did happen. This series was kind of bizarre too, in that at the very end of it, Coach Budenholzer, I get that right, Brian?
That's correct.
Yep.
Yay. Coach Budenholzer got flack for not playing playoff minutes to his starters, namely Giannis, Chris Middleton, etc. And I agree with that point to a point because essentially this series was very, 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 very close. It'll ring true to you as well, Chris, with your Lakers, to being a 2-2 series. Um, the Bucks were 1-1. They lost a very close loss. Then they lost game 4, and then also Giannis was limping after game 4 and then got injured in game 5. So this series was very close to being a 2-2 game with the Bucks having the better player. And what happened was it ended up as a 3-1 series, and then Giannis got injured in game 5, and that's all she wrote. So I agree with people that complain there, and I don't understand because Coach Budenholzer has looked amazing as a coach. This team significantly outperformed what they should have. I've been railing on this forever. This team letting Malcolm Brogdon walk for 20 million a season for some future second round picks when you have Giannis in his prime was criminal. And somehow Coach Budenholzer got this team to play amazing defense, to shoot lots of threes, to look great. And rest assured, if this hadn't been played in a bubble, if the Bucks had home court advantage the entire way through, which is what they earned, I think this is much different if Giannis isn't injured. But basically, some bad bounces in 2 games caught, and then an injury to their star player cost them this series. And I'm seeing people overreact to it. And then on the flip side, hats off to Spoelstra, a coach we love, and Jimmy Butler, a player we love, for just playing amazingly. And then also, funny one, Tyler Hero was someone who I think committed to University of Wisconsin-Madison and then went to another school. So interesting player.
Well, I think that the bottom line, all you have to do is say Giannis was injured. That's it. That's all you need. That's the explanation, right? The Lakers took on the Detroit Pistons without Magic Johnson and Byron Scott. They got swept. Why is that a surprise? right? When you have a great player who goes down, they're just not going to be able to replace them. Now, there were some broader issues. I don't think it was the minutes issue, although the minutes certainly didn't help because you might as well play great players. But the difference with the Bucks is they had so many good players. I mean, looking at their page right now, and do you know how many players they had playing at a star level? That's to say 200 wins produced per 48 or above.
So what you got?
It's a lot.
Giannis?
It's like 5 or 6.
Did Middleton hit that rank this
Yes.
year?
Yes, he did.
Giannis, Middleton,
Dante DiVincenzo is one.
Yes, he did as well.
Who else? What do we got?
More guards.
Oh,
They have like
list them up
3
on
guards. Connaughton, Pat Connaughton.
Pat Connaughton did as well.
Bledsoe maybe, but probably not, I think.
Nope, not Bledsoe, although
Bledsoe
he
had an
was
off year.
really good. 189, so almost. The two you're missing are George Hill, who
Of
shot
course.
incredibly from 3
Yeah, I knew
and
that.
was actually just a fantastic player, and Ersan Ilyasova.
Oh, I
He's
didn't
been
know
very
that.
good for very long.
Did he didn't play many minutes though, did he?
No, he didn't, but he still performed at a star level. He still produced 4.6 wins.
He's
So,
a
now
modern big, right? He is a modern
He
big.
is.
If only
He's
he had
one of
been
the
5
guys-
years younger.
He's one of the guys I wish the Lakers had signed because he always seems to be available for cheap.
He's one of those players, though, that did have the injury mid-career that seemed like he was down. So it's like if he has a back year. George Hill was very good for the Spurs, very good for the Pacers. I've laughed because I've said the Pacers lost the Kawhi trade in part because, yes, they traded Kawhi for George Hill, but then they let George Hill walk. So it's like if you trade his star player for another player and then you let that player walk, you just lose. Best classic example of that, by the way, is with the Suns with Charles Barkley for the future Phoenix guard. How am I missing his name? Anyway, or Utah Jazz guard, sorry.
So the trade you're thinking of is the 76ers traded Charles Barkley to the Phoenix Suns for Jeff Hornacek, Andrew Lang, and Tim Perry.
And Lang and Perry never turned into anything. Hornacek was a star for Utah, but the problem is the 76ers let him out the door. So it's going, okay, so you just traded your star for a worse star, and then you let the worst star walk. So that's ostensibly you just letting a star walk. Good job.
Yeah, not a great look. In fact, you're better off just letting the star walk and actually having a salary cap space.
Or possibly letting him walk, and then back in those days it was easier to do this trade for the exemption, and you could use that.
Now, here's another trivia question. So we just talked about the Milwaukee Bucks and Coach Bud and the amazing job he did. The Milwaukee Bucks played 73 games this season. How many wins do you think they produced?
I think there's possibly inflation on the site because I've looked at that before. Didn't know if there was a bug there that season. That's something we've looked at, and I don't know if we looked at the end of the season. But I'm going to say over 60 easily.
62.46.
Yeah, they were. I mean, I think they dropped just below it with the bubble because that was kind of the telltale part, right? Is in the bubble, those last 8 games, they didn't look like themselves. And so that's why my simple point is if the season had ended normally, right? They are in much better shape in the playoffs. Unfortunately, it didn't. But they looked a little weaker, but they were above 10 SRS. For those that don't know, that's point margin. So how much you outscore your opponent in a 100 possession game. So plus 10 would be you'd outscore an average opponent by 10. And the SRS part is it's also adjusted for opponents. So basically
they were at 10.1.
Oh, they
even after the
10.
bubble. They stayed above, just barely.
Okay, so the difference here is in margin of victory they stayed above 10, but they did not stay ahead of 10 in SRS. Schedule adjusted.
Got it.
So essentially,
so close. So close.
They were an all-time great team before the bubble. They fell below that range, and then you said something, Chris. You lose Giannis. That's the ball game.
Yeah.
It's worth noting that this is 2 years in a row that essentially Giannis and Eric Bledsoe, I believe, have been injured in the playoffs. So Eric Bledsoe was injured for sure. Last year's playoffs, I'm not 100% sure he was injured, but he was downright terrible against the Raptors. And additionally, similar thing happened. So the Bucks were up, I believe, 3-1 against the Raptors, or 2-2. I think it was 2-2, and they were getting ready to go up 3, and I think they had been up 2-1 or something. But in Game 5, Giannis fell over guarding an inbound play, exited the game, after he exits the game, and I actually got this was a really bizarre thing. I was picking up food and the game was playing on the monitor. I went and got Buffalo Wild Wings and the game was playing, and I like it would just happened to walk in for the end of this game. But essentially, Giannis got injured at the last second of the game. The Milwaukee Bucks missed a clutch rebound that the Raptors got back to actually get the lead and then win the game. On a nail biter last 2 minutes. Where I would argue if Giannis had been in the game, there's no way in hell the Bucks missed that rebound. So 2 years in a row, basically injuries to Eric Bledsoe and Giannis Antetokounmpo have cost them a trip to the finals. It is just bizarre bad luck. But I do think, there's a lot of finger pointing. It reminds me very much of the 76ers. The 76ers lost Ben Simmons right before the playoffs. Like, you don't need to analyze their performance in the playoffs. If you lose your best player in the middle of the playoffs, as Chris is aware happens to teams like the Lakers repeatedly, apparently, it can hurt you.
Yeah. I will say that I do think that there are some flaws in the construction of the Bucks that can show up against the right teams. And basically it boils down to the thing that I always mock and say is not really something that we should judge people by does become important in the playoffs. And that is the ability to actually initiate the offense, drive to the basket, put pressure on the rim. The Milwaukee Bucks are a team that has very few players who actually have that capability. Giannis is essentially the only one. George Hill is not going to drive to the basket. Middleton's mainly a mid-range guy. DiVincenzo, Bledsoe, maybe, but he's too small to really do it effectively. The Bucks lack secondary playmaking if Giannis is shut down. And in last season's matchup with the Raptors, they put Kawhi on Giannis and he shut him down. And in this season's matchup with the Miami Heat, they put Bam Adebayo on him and Bam Adebayo shut him down. So again, it's not just the individual player. They obviously slanted the defense around that in order to do that. But when someone takes away your best player on offense, you have to have a counter. And the Bucks did not appear to have a useful counter.
I'd agree. I mean, the Bucks have been interesting in that we always have like a love-hate relationship with some of the front office and things there. But yeah, I think we were definitely questioning the Lopez brothers. Wesley Matthews is an example, a role player. So,
Especially against the Heat, right, Dre? Do you want Brook Lopez in against the Heat? Probably not.
and I think it was just one of those, I think, hubris to kind of cut corners because you were such a good team and hope you'd run it back, because exactly what we said would happen, exactly what you're aware of with the Warriors, right? If one of your star goes down injured for 2 or 3 games, that's it. I did also, that's an overarching theme I wanted to say on the playoffs, which is just not judging in general the playoffs too harshly against people. People saying there are no excuses. It's like, no, that if there was one place for excuse, you know, elimination basketball where you're playing at the highest level is one of the places where there is absolutely excuse. One of the things that I think is a good one to get us into our next series, Chris, the Lakers versus the Clippers. Paul George has been commenting that he's been having mental health issues, depression, etc., being in the bubble. And I've seen people come against that, infamously at this point. I don't know if it was specifically against Paul George or if it was like against Dak Prescott. But Skip Bayless was coming out against that kind of mentality. And I hate that, because if there's ever a place where you can say, I was off my game today for a legitimate reason, and we lost the game as a result, and that cost us the series. NBA playoff basketball is a place. Many of us in normal 9 to 5 jobs or regular jobs, right? It's like some days we'll have an off day, and you're just like, I'll make it up tomorrow, or I'll work on the weekend, or I'll take a PTO day. You don't get to do that in playoff basketball. And as I said on last week's show, this is not normal. The bubble is not normal. So there are lots of good reasons why great teams like the Clippers may falter in close games and lose. And I get incensed when I then hop on Twitter or read pundits who are like, no excuses. You just have to show up for every game.
Well, you know what? Skip Bayless should go ahead and try going on a business trip for 3 months where he only gets to go to a hotel room and then go to a conference room and return to his hotel room, and see how his mental state is after that.
I mean, Skip
Absolutely.
Bayless is basically just a performance artist, right? So I don't listen to what he says really. But when people are seriously saying that, there's no excuses at all. That to me means I'm just too lazy to look at the data and the post mortem and try to figure out what to do better next time, right? That's what that means to me. that is not a way you succeed in business or sports.
I got to be a jerk on this, Chris. As a Lakers fan, not specifically about the Clippers, you said you've liked the Clippers, but are you experiencing any Schadenfreude to Kawhi and Paul George about their selection? And then also saying, good riddance, who needs you? We got Anthony Davis.
Yes, and the reason is primarily because the Clippers fans decided that this was going to be the year they're going to go ahead and lord it over the Lakers fans and claim that their team was better. So they went into the season, and you're not aware of this. I'm only aware of this because I listen faithfully to the Lakers podcasts. The Clippers actually erected billboards all around Los Angeles, pumping up the Clippers and subtweeting the Lakers, saying things like "streetlights, not spotlights." And blue collar, not glitz and glamour, as if the Clippers were somehow this scrappy team that played the right way and the Lakers were this villainous team that needed to be put in their place.
How much did Steve Ballmer pay for the Clippers?
He spent
$2 billion.
$2 billion,
he
yeah.
bought the forum,
he
right?
just got out of his lunch pail, right? He pulled out of his lunch pail at the scrappy guy and just paid that amount, yeah.
So these scrappy little Clippers with Kawhi Leonard and Paul George and Lou Williams and Montrezl Harrell and all the Patrick Beverley and all these other players, scrappy. That's what got the Lakers fans upset. So I like the Clippers in general, but this particular edition of the Clippers I found unlikable.
And then again, as I was kind of noting to that, Kawhi was looking at the Lakers and the Clippers and decided on the Clippers over the Lakers. You said some of the dirt on Paul George was that his agent was upset with LeBron James and the Lakers. So Paul George was one of these names that everybody thought was going to the Lakers. Paul George was supposed to be next to LeBron James last season, which didn't happen. And similarly, our injury point, the Lakers last season were a playoff squad. Would have been a contender had they been able to pull the trigger on the Anthony Davis trade earlier, but then just had some injuries. So, yeah, it is more amusing that you had two star players. And do you have any opinion? I got to ask on this because obviously I just gave him the out of he's saying he's having a tough time. The numbers seem to back this. It seems like it's more than what could be contributed to injury. But Paul George has always been one of these up and down players, right? He looked very, very good young, got a horrific injury in the Olympics, not in the Olympics itself either. I believe it was practicing. Came back, didn't play as well, looked worse. We were talking this about the Rockets, and it might come up when we talk the Rockets. Like PJ Tucker, the Pacers started playing him as a power forward instead of a small forward, so he was an injured power forward instead of a star small forward and looked worse. But then he goes to OKC, plays as a starting small forward, and looks amazing. And we're like, oh, he is an MVP caliber player. Do you think there's anything that suggests that maybe he's on the decline, or is it just, bubble basketball?
I think it's bubble basketball. He played at a star level this year. He has all these great tools in terms of not just scoring, but outside shooting. He was a great outside shooter. So I think that Paul George will be just fine, but clearly he was feeling the effects of being in the bubble. Now, I will say that, of course, while the Lakers did want to sign Kawhi Leonard, they instead wisely kept their cash once Kawhi Leonard was gone and used it instead on two players that basically replaced Kawhi Leonard's production. And those players are Alex Caruso and Dwight Howard.
Well, yeah, and I mean, Dwight was obviously a little depressing with some of his mass comments. How's he been doing in the bubble? I haven't been following that closely.
So Dwight's played fine in the bubble. He did not play at all against the Rockets. So basically what happened in the series against the Rockets, the Lakers played JaVale McGee and Dwight Howard in game one. They lost. They played JaVale McGee briefly in game two, and did not play Dwight Howard at all. And then after that, they didn't play either of them until the garbage time of game five. So the Lakers responded to the Houston Rockets by going small. But as we've always discussed, small ball is not about, hey, you're smaller. It's about, hey, you're more skilled. And the Lakers were better equipped to go small because going small for the Lakers means playing Anthony Davis at center.
Well, Brian and I were going back and forth, and I mean, LeBron James and Anthony Davis have the bodies of respectively a power forward and a center. And even with the Warriors, the Warriors had one season of small ball, kind of, but their first title when they had Andrew Bogut, a traditional 7 foot defensive minded center, a player we thought was underrated in the pantheon of the Warriors, rise to success, and was a very, very good player. And of course, he probably would have stuck around on the Warriors, except they had to shed cap for that guy, Kevin Durant, who is 6'10" with the updated measurements. So it's one of these. It's like it is not going small to have Draymond Green and Kevin Durant as your forwards who are, look like that. So it wasn't necessarily small, but it does look like they, left the traditional center at the door and instead played the center that is more skilled.
Yeah. And it worked for the Lakers. Obviously, they steamrolled the Rockets after game one, just like they steamrolled the Portland Trailblazers after game one. And a lot of the credit has to go to the third leg of the Lakers' big three. And of course, I'm referring to Alex Caruso. Alex Caruso, who is so beloved by Lakers fans, apparently hated by Houston Rockets fans, entirely hated. But he is quite a remarkable player. She's not a particularly good shooter, but he is an amazing and savvy defender and just does so many things so well. And actually, as I promised, Alex Caruso on the season, above average player, wins produced of 114, which puts him ahead of Jamal Murray, who was a below average player at 91. So there you have it. Alex Caruso is better than Jamal Murray.
These two series might have to blend together. The Nuggets, Clippers, Lakers, Rockets. Yeah, I mean that was as I've kept joking. Like Jamal Murray, the question is what we're seeing in the playoffs for real, or and you know what? Honestly, Chris, if it's just bubble basketball for Murray, uh, that's enough for me because I really I've noted this. I am fine whoever comes out of the West. It's over for me to be worried because either A, LeBron James gets his 10th NBA Finals, that's one more than Magic Johnson, or the Nuggets get their first NBA Finals. And either one of those narratives I am elated with. I did note that in this playoffs, the only team I couldn't root for, and it made me feel terrible because I'm a huge fan of Chris Paul, though, is the Oklahoma City Thunder. Is I cannot root for the squad that tore a dynasty out of Seattle needlessly. So that normally I kind of talk to people who are fans of teams as kind of silly. You're just rooting for clothes. You're not rooting for players. I typically am a players fan. I'm a huge fan of Jimmy Butler, so I'm more than fine with him going to the NBA Finals. But the Oklahoma City Thunder were the only team I couldn't root for. And like I said, though, the Nuggets, though, with Jamal Murray, I really do hope he's turning into a star. And if he's just a star for this, it could be enough. To the funny point about you saying players that were better, sorry, do a brief rewind, then we can keep talking about these series, Chris. I got to give a shout out to Brian. So Brian, at the beginning of the season, made a very flippant comment that turned out to be true, kind of. Brian said that he predicted that Andre Iguodala would have a better season than D'Angelo Russell. Now, annoyingly, as many know, we talked about this on many shows. Andre Iguodala was essentially shut down by the Memphis Grizzlies while they waited for the trade deadline to approach before they finally shed him. And then they did eventually.
I mean, they made the playoffs. They should have kept him.
Well, I think the way we described it is Andre Iguodala is like, I'm not playing for you. And they basically went, okay, well, what we can do to maximize your value is we wait till the trade deadline and see who's a buyer and trade you then. They should have just given him to the Lakers. That's more selfish on my part, Chris, than logical on their part. But Andre Iguodala goes to the Miami Heat. He doesn't quite play better than D'Angelo Russell on a totals perspective, total wins produced in the regular season. But when you add on his playoff numbers, Brian, Andre Iguodala has had a better season than D'Angelo Russell.
Yeah, no question. I mean, that seemed obvious to me, but I'm not surprised.
Yeah. Well, again, the thing about D'Angelo Russell is this. He actually is a player who's fun to watch at times. He's got this interesting, very sort of old school kind of game. He's got a lot of great handles and even some mid range. But the bottom line is he's not an efficient shooter. He's not an efficient scorer. And he doesn't get to the free throw line. Where are you going to go with that? This is a guy who just cannot, under any circumstances, be an above average player.
Here's the big
Oh,
thing:
well,
the Warriors' weakness is size and defense at this point, right? They still have Curry; he can score and all that. So, why are you trying to add D'Angelo Russell to that when you need size and defense? It
they
makes no
got
sense.
Wiggins now, man. Remember?
Oh
And I
my
need
goodness,
D'Angelo Russell.
you're cruel
Please, we
tonight.
want Brian. We did, yeah, exactly. Don't torment Brian like that. That's doing
Sorry,
him
Brian.
dirty.
That was
But
funny. That was funny.
what I was going to say, the funny thing, Chris, is when we've looked at D'Angelo Russell, he's actually good at a lot of non-scoring things, and so we've said he could be a quite productive player if he'd stop shooting so much, because you just basically listed in order all of the things he doesn't do well at scoring. But what we do know, and we are fine with, is players know that scoring gets them paid. So D'Angelo Russell and Andrew Wiggins are both probably never going to stop trying to take 20 shots a game, and unless something major happens, that's not going to change. It is depressing that apparently the Warriors did have a good trade asset in him. They just traded poorly.
Yeah.
I'm
By
trying to
the
think
way,
about. Oh, good.
By the way, I was going to add one other thought on the Rockets before we leave their steaming corpse by the side of the highway, and that is that the Rockets have a microball strategy, and their microball strategy is very simple. They need to be able to penetrate to the rim, and they need to be able to get open 3-point shots. That's their strategy in a nutshell. And with the Lakers, what the Lakers are able to do when they go small with Anthony Davis at center is they're able to play Anthony Davis and LeBron James as rim protectors. So the Rockets and their bevy of short players couldn't score at the rim. And once they can't score at the rim, the Lakers were able to deploy a defense that took away the 3-point shot. And as the series wore on, the Rockets took fewer and fewer 3-point shots. They basically could not exercise their strategy. They were just physically inferior.
And what was ironic actually is, giving Miami credit, I was looking at Miami, and Miami started taking lots of shots from three and was taking over half. So interesting comparable there. I do actually want to give a funny comment to that though, Chris, which is in game two, had the Rockets played anybody, had they played D'Angelo Russell instead of Russell Westbrook, they could have taken that series or that game. And if that's the case, then the Rockets are up 2-0. And even in the worst case scenario, after four games, right, it's a 2-2 series. And it is kind of frustrating to see the fallout, right? Because I believe D'Antoni's on his way out of the Rockets.
Yep, he
And
said he's not coming back.
yeah,
I quit. He said I quit before they could fire him.
Interesting. Oh, I mean, if he wants another job, he's got another job, maybe in Milwaukee. But
No, they said they're bringing Coach Bud back, but it looks like D'Antoni's headed to the Pacers.
Interesting. Huh.
Yeah, so they said they're bringing
Really?
Coach Bud back, and they also said they can't afford to add a player of Chris Paul's salary. They said both those things today. Kind of seems like we're heading towards them cheaping out and Giannis leaving. That would suck.
I have many comments on why the Bucks don't deserve Giannis, but that'll be another show. D'Antoni on the Pacers, known traditionally as the lockdown D team with D'Antoni at the helm. Huh. That'll be interesting to see. All right. But anyway, I just want to point out on both, I made the same point about Miami and Milwaukee, but this series was a couple bounces away from being a closer series. And so seeing all the freakouts at the end are kind of ridiculous to me. But we will take the side of saying if you have a core of James Harden and Clint Capella and Chris Paul, which they did at one point, you should just surround that with decent role players and win. And they surrounded that core with horrible role players and then shipped out Clint Capella and Chris Paul. And as you were saying, Chris, I believe you said on the show, Russell Westbrook's athleticism just is leaving him as he's getting older and more banged up. So it's kind of, I'm mad that people are trying to say, see, the Rockets strategy never worked, instead of saying, see, the Rockets were a couple unlucky bounces away from the finals a few years ago. See, the Rockets, Daryl Morey didn't put the right squad and wasted money, etc. It always gets annoying to me when people try and go, see, this is proof that this strategy doesn't work, instead of giving credence to sometimes stuff happens in the playoffs.
And it's also the case that this is a great illustration of the fact that personalities do matter. The reason that the Rockets traded Chris Paul for Russell Westbrook wasn't because Daryl Morey thought this is going to be an upgrade. It's because Chris Paul and James Harden hated each other.
And apologies, my phone heard me talk, and apparently I said something close enough to a keyword that gets the phone to listen. So that's why I was going there. I mean, that's been the case. It's one of the credits I give to Phil Jackson, was he was very good at balancing egos. I think that might have been his greatest skill as a coach, because I think something that we have seen over the history of the NBA is just how hard it is to not only get multiple star players on a team together, but to get those star players to get along and not eventually, as you're saying, hate each other, get mad that one's taking the spotlight, et cetera. Right? Shaq and Kobe broke up. Shaq and Penny broke up. We've seen this happen time and time again. So I think a lot of times we don't give credence to just how difficult it is to have two of the top 10 players in the NBA in a squad together.
Yeah. Now, because it is approaching midnight where you are, we still have to get to the point where we talk about the Lakers versus Nuggets and make some
let's wrap up.
predictions.
By the way, I'm Central Time, Chris, so close to 11, but I know we've given a lot of time to the show, which I appreciate. The only wrap up I want to give on the Denver Clippers series, I realize I didn't talk as much about it. All I've got to say is Jamal Murray is amazing. Nikola Jokic is amazing. Hope Paul George comes back okay. The one comment I made pre-show was like, I would really want to graph the number of minutes where saying the Clippers are going to win versus the Clippers are not going to win, and say that confidently what that number would be, because I think it's like 90% of the minutes of that series. Even as recently as the half where the Clippers were still up by one, it would have been logic in game 7. So that would be a fun thing. Maybe I'll track that at some point. I can do that with Popcorn Machine. And the last, I just have to give a shout out to Magnus Carlsen, who played in a chess 960 event. He and Hikaru Nakamura, the best United States chess player, best United States chess personality out there, they tied for number 1 at the chess 960 event. And the announcers asked Magnus Carlsen, they said, "Hey, we keep seeing you look over your shoulder. What are you looking at?" And he said, "I have a big ass TV." And he says he loves the NBA. He either watches or DVRs the NBA game. And he recast. So it was the most amazing thing. They're like, Magnus, you just won this. Tied for first on this major event. He won $31,000. Go Magnus. They're like, you just did this. What's going on? And then in the middle of this interview, it was just like the most bizarre thing. He recaps how the Clippers fell apart in Game 6. And I was just looking around, going like, is this for real? Like, the best chess player in the world. He didn't say Nikola Jokic. He said the Clippers collapsed, but it was amazing, and I got to give.
So let me get this straight. He's playing in a chess tournament while watching NBA playoff games.
I think the game is on behind him, and I think he probably either pauses it or turns it off. But as you know, with like chess tournaments, there's things. So I don't think he was watching while he was playing. But they've got cameras on them as the tournament, and they'll see them as the game or whatever. Or they get up. And they'd say, they just see him in his chair kind of waiting, and he'd look behind, and they're basically like, oh yeah, he's watching games. Yeah, he watches the NBA in the middle of games. I would doubt you can't, as a top chess player, be watching a game as you're playing, I hope. I mean, although Magnus Carlsen is that good, so maybe
he's pretty damn good. So to continue with that theme of the Clippers and their collapse, let me just point out 2 personnel things about the Clippers this season, and especially in this series. The first is that the Clippers have Ivica Zubac, Brian's boy, Ivica Zubac, an incredible player, 283 wins produced per 48, second best Clipper on the season in terms of wins produced, ahead of Paul George, behind only Kawhi Leonard. He is a legit 7-footer, somebody who can actually defend Nikola Jokic in the post. And instead of playing him, they played Montrezl Harrell, who won 6th Man of the Year because he scored a lot of points, but is actually having a down season and came into the bubble because of having to leave to grieve the death of his mother figure, his grandmother, came in without any practice, and Doc Rivers threw him in. So would you rather be playing the guy who got 283 and was great on the season, or the guy who got 103 is grieving the loss of effectively his mom and hasn't practiced or played?
And I mean, what's also rough, I saw a doctored clip, so this wasn't real, yeah, but it was a pretend interview with, I think, Montrez and one other player on the Clippers, I think Lou Williams, I think it was about LeBron, but they kept inserting Jokic's name, where they're just like, what are you supposed to do? How are we supposed to defend him? I think it is very cruel to say, Zubac, you're not defending Jokic well enough. It's like, well, he's one of the best offensive players in the game. That would be like pulling Gary Payton and going, you're not guarding Michael Jordan well enough. He's still scoring 25 points a game on us.
The stats I saw were that when Harrell was on the floor defending Jokic shot 67%.
Well, thank you, Doctor. And as last note on that, Doc Rivers is at this point well known. He has lost multiple 3-1 series, I think, with multiple teams. Didn't he do it with the Magic with Tracy McGrady?
He did it with the Magic with Tracy McGrady in that famous series where Tracy McGrady said it feels great to finally be moving on to the second round. After they went to the 3-1 lead. I'm looking forward to the second round.
Dre, here's my stat. Doc Rivers, as coach, has given up 22% of all 3-1 comebacks in NBA history.
That's amazing, and I mean, we can actually give him some fault there. I mean, it's a Brian point. You play your best players, and even if the opponent's playing really good players, you don't get baited. I mean, that was what cost the Nuggets back in the day. The Nuggets against the Warriors. The Warriors sat David Lee out of necessity, and the Nuggets were like, well, we're going to bench our bigs too because JaVale McGee. Why would we play him? We can play whoever else. All right, Chris. Let's at least.
I got one more Clippers thing, and then we're going to Lakers Nuggets. So the other Clippers thing is the following. So the Clippers looking forward to their showdown with the Los Angeles Lakers, knowing that they're going to have to guard LeBron and not wanting Kawhi to have to guard LeBron the whole time, went out and traded Mo Harkless, a 2020 first round pick and a 2021 second round pick, and Jerome Robinson for Marcus Morris Sr., the LeBron stopper. Now, let me just point out that on the season, Mo Harkless was an above-average player, 146. And for the Clippers, Marcus Morris Sr. was terrible, minus 99, negative 1.13 wins.
Was he okay? So the Morris twins are always confusing to me. So is one of the Morrises on the Lakers?
Yes.
Markieff
Morris is on the Lakers. The Lakers picked him up for free after he was waived.
And which Morris played on the Celtics?
Marcus.
So what's interesting, I've made this point, and I'm glad I get to hold this up, is Brad Stevens does seem to be one of those coaches that just does good schemes and stuff. And I've always gone, and Brian I got to even argue about this with like Kemba Walker versus Kyrie and stuff, is if you trade a player to the Celtics, they're going to probably look better on the Celtics. And if you pick up a player from the Celtics, they're probably going to be worse. So Marcus Morris looked terrible before going to the Celtics, looked all right on the Celtics, and then left. So that's hilarious. It's like what you really wanted was Brad Stevens and the Celtics defensive scheme, not Marcus Morris Sr.
And Marcus Morris still has not had a single season in which he was above average.
What was
below
his best
average
with? Who was his best with Boston?
His best with Boston was his 2000 and it depends on in terms of wins produced. In the 2019 season, he was a below average player at 0.057 per 48, and he produced 2.5 wins.
Oh God, that's still yeah. It doesn't matter if it doesn't. Like, you have to like legitimately stop LeBron James, not just make him a little worse at shooting. All right. So on that note, how are you feeling about Markieff Morris, LeBron James, Anthony Davis? At this point with the Nuggets, I'm so elated, right? 4-7 game series in a row, 2-3-1 comebacks. I'd be lying if I said I didn't want the finals. And then, of course, if they make the finals, I'm going to get greedy and really want a title. I think when I looked at Arturo's numbers, he said so Arturo Galletti, American Numbers on Twitter, if you don't follow him, does great work on handicapping. He did have the Clippers as a 83-17 favorite against the Nuggets. Although, like I said, that number looked like gold for 90% of the series. I believe he has the Lakers as a 65-35 favorite. How are you feeling about that number? How are you feeling about the series?
Well, I got a lot of respect for Arturo's numbers. I will just point out that on the season, the Lakers beat the Nuggets in the season series 3-1. The one game that the Nuggets won was a game in which LeBron James did not play. So not the most hopeful of signs. The Nuggets, of course, are powered primarily by Nikola Jokic, although Jamal Murray has been great this series. So Nikola Jokic, of course, is a phenomenal player, though he's going to have to go up against JaVale McGee, Dwight Howard, Anthony Davis. So the Lakers have plenty of defenders. He is not going to be able to bully his way to the basket against Dwight. He's not going to be able to outquick his way to the basket around AD or JaVale McGee. So he's going to have some difficulties. He struggled mightily against the Lakers this season. His numbers were terrible. Jamal Murray, of course, is playing great. But you know who else was playing great? Damian Lillard was playing great.
Oh, okay.
Do you know who else was playing great? James Harden was playing great. And the Lakers made them look hopeless and helpless. So because of the fact that I have so much respect for Jokic, and because I am fond of the Nuggets because of you, I'm going to predict Lakers in 6, as opposed to a more insulting Lakers in 5. However, what I will also point out is that, uniquely, if the Lakers go up 3-1 in the series, the Nuggets fans can say correctly, we've got them right where we want them.
Oh man, if it goes to another game, I don't know how I'll react if it goes to another game 7. Funny bit of trivia: I have the same birthday as Coach Malone, so I didn't actually even watch, or even I've done this a lot of times. Box score watch the game, where I'm kind of keeping it on the side and updating. I was celebrating my birthday, so I didn't end up watching the game at all, but I certainly got my birthday wish. Uh, and I keep, it's funny because I hope I'm wrong, but I've been joking to you for years that every time the Nuggets look like a contender, they run into the Lakers and fall. And like I said, here's 2 funny bits of trivia on that. When I lived in Colorado, that's why I'm a Denver Nuggets fan. I grew up in Denver, spent the first 20 some odd years of my life, 30 some odd years of my life as a Colorado resident. Um, I went to the 2009 NBA Western Conference Finals. Kobe Bryant shot horrendously. I think he got 25 points on 22 shots, and of course, like 12 free throws or something. And the Nuggets lost, so that was a huge, huge bummer. I got to go to that series. The Nuggets did get a win at home, but not the game I chose to go to. I used to pick my spots when I picked games at home. So I would the well-known thing about the Nuggets altitude advantage is on back-to-back games, the traveling team, if the Nuggets have rested, is just like a surefire team to
Schedule
lose.
loss, baby. Schedule loss.
And of course, I chose the Miami Heat. I bought really good seats. It was amazing. It was totally worth it because I was sitting super close to the hoop right behind the rim, and I got to see like LeBron James dunk, and he is not right. He is giant, he is graceful. It was ridiculous. And guess what else happened there, Chris? The Nuggets lost as well. So
Oh,
back in the day, I would try and pick my spots for Nuggets games to see a win, and the two ones that stick out in my mind of them losing are to the Lakers in the Western Conference Finals and to LeBron James when they should have won. So I'm hoping I'm wrong, and I'm hoping the Nuggets, don't upset me. Although, like I said earlier, it doesn't matter what happens to me. I'm happy with the narrative. I think I would definitely, definitely, definitely prefer the Heat out east just because I like Jimmy Butler so much. And nothing makes me laugh more than the number of teams that have given up on him and the number of fans that say Jimmy Butler has an attitude problem, watching those teams go to hell, and then Jimmy Butler still thrive elsewhere.
yeah. And I think that, even if the Nuggets lose, and again, if they get the Lakers up 3-1, then they have them right where they want them. But even if the Nuggets lose, I mean, let's face it, this is a great young team. Jokic is a phenomenal player. Michael Porter Jr. has actually looked great and is so young and just improving. And he gives the Nuggets that thing which I said is so important, which is the secondary playmaker, secondary option. And with Jamal Murray, they have 2 of those. So they're really well positioned. I hope they'll do extremely well after the Lakers win a couple more championships.
And then one thing that's been rough.
We still need to pass those damned Boston Celtics. We're trailing 17-16.
Yeah, I noted unfortunately that narrative wise, the Lakers versus either the Celtics or the Heat is a fantastic narrative. And in part because the Nuggets don't make finals, the Nuggets series don't really have, Nuggets versus ninth man, third man off the bench, 15 minutes a game in the playoffs. Andre Iguodala isn't quite the same as LeBron James versus the Heat. So LeBron James versus the Heat or Lakers Celtics, either of those is a fantastic narrative. I look forward to both. Like I said, my prediction for years at this point, albeit jokingly, has been the Nuggets are doomed to failure based on historical precedent. And that's why I'm already starting to coax myself saying, whatever happens, happens.
Well, just to indulge the old-fashioned NBA conspiracy theories, if the Lakers race out to 3-1 lead and then the Nuggets even it up at 3-3 and we go to game 7, I'm sure that we're going to look onto the court and see that the NBA has brought out of retirement Daryl Garrettson, Steve Jaffee, and Tim Donaghy to officiate the game.
Oh, I was going to say you didn't want to go with the Scott Foster's brothers one that already has that current conspiracy theory there.
Yes.
Although the NBA the NBA would love a Lakers Celtics finals in the bubble
Oh, absolutely.
is what they want. Come on.
It clearly they're willing to sell Lakers Celtics or LeBron versus the Heat. They are dying for it, and they are just praying on their hands and knees that the Nuggets don't make it. I'm always reminded of one of the great Lakers quotes of all time from former commissioner, the late great David Stern. And when he was asked, what would be your ideal finals matchup? And he said, the Lakers versus the Lakers.
Yes, definitely. I mean, maybe if they'd been a little better in recent history, Lakers Knicks, because that's the two biggest markets. But
Yep.
yeah. All right, I've gotten everything I wanted to say, and I even got my shout into Magnus early. Actually, I'll wrap the comment on the Nuggets with another chess comparable to that same chess tournament or an earlier chess tournament. So Hikaru Nakamura also played in the Magnus Carlsen Grand Championship, went to the finals against Magnus Carlsen, and they ended up going all the way to the end. So basically, chess gets ridiculous because they play a best of seven series. And then after the best of seven series, they play a tiebreaker. And then after the tiebreaker, they play a game called Armageddon, which is like basically almost a shootout. You could view it that way, and it's got weird rules.
They
I'm
don't
not
go
going
to
to go
Blitz
into them.
before Armageddon? Isn't it?
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying is they
Oh,
do
okay,
best of
okay.
seven, then a tiebreaker with Blitz, then Armageddon. So it made it all the way to the end. At one point, the commentator, former five-time U.S. champion Yasser Seirawan, said they both deserve the title, which is true, which is also apt because, as I already noted, that happened in the next tournament between them. That happened. They were just like, you know what, you guys are both the best. You both get a title. Although I think, sadly, in the third tournament they're now playing, and I don't think Hikaru is gonna make it, but Magnus is tied for first with other U.S. phenom Wesley So, or was. I didn't catch up on the news today.
You can call Magnus the Lakers of chess.
Yeah, I mean, that'd probably be. It's kind of hard to say because I'd say that definitely goes to Gary Kasparov. I don't know. Magnus is too hard to pin because he's still mid-career. Maybe the Warriors. I don't know. But what I was going to say though is in that series, Hikaru came back from being down 3-1 in a series. Interestingly enough, he managed to come back, win in overtime to win a pivotal series. It would have put him up 3-1. Actually, it was one of the best games, one of the best matches in a set ever. And then, of course, sadly, he doesn't win it. And I feel the Nuggets are that way, which is coming back from 3-1 twice is one of the most remarkable achievements ever, even if they don't win the title. And it's sports is just so unfair. It's so winner take all that you can put up an all-time historic series, for both Hikaru in that game and then in the playoffs for this, and you don't win and you're forgotten to history. All I got.
There you go. Well, we will have to reconvene when this series is resolved, one way or the other. And it'll either be a Lakers celebration or a Nugget celebration. But either way, we'll know that both teams played hard.
It's amazing, and I'm glad we're here. And one of us comes out happy, which will be good. We'll say, Brian, tiebreaker. You got thoughts on either?
No, I'm good. I'm just ready to watch. I'm excited. There's been a lot of good games, and I love so many players on both teams, so it'll be fun. How about Bol Bol getting some minutes? Is he hurt again?
Yeah,
Bol Bol was looking okay. Anyway.
Interesting. Yeah, Bol could make Dwight look silly, Chris. He's younger.
That is very true. I'm looking forward.
I think he's out of the rotation now. I don't think they're going to play him anymore.
He is, but maybe at some point in time, Malone rolls out the super lineup with Jokic, Michael Porter Jr., Bol, and Jamal. I guess they'll still have Murray in the backcourt.
You gotta have Jamal Murray. Yeah, love it. All right, well, let's just plug one more time. So, Chris Ye, I believe the best place, as you've noted in past, is your site, chrisye.com.
And that's CHRISYEH.com. That's Y is in yellow, E is in elephant, H is in house. Yellow elephant house.
Who has clearly been getting Zoom call experience, Chris, actually going to that. And then, of course, you're the same name on Twitter. If you haven't read the books Blitz Scaling or The Alliance, check those out. And then, of course, you can find, I think you go through Anchor FM, but I believe that aggregates out to all the majors. The Chris Ye podcast is definitely worth a listen.
Wherever fine podcasts are not sold.
Yes. And yeah, you've had amazing ones. Like as we mentioned, I still got to give props to it. So because of the pandemic, you didn't have your Harvard Business School reunion, and you have a bunch of amazing, shockingly, alumnus that you went to school with that you would have met at the reunion, and instead said, "What if we meet up on a podcast and release that publicly to the world?" Which has been a boon to us and some of the best podcasting material. And I think you still had a couple even post when the reunion would have been. So
Yeah, and so we'll get back to that. It's just been a very busy season for a lot of reasons, but I will get back to that eventually.
no, I mean, I kind of joked it was good for us and bad for you when the pandemic hit and grounded you, because you were traveling so much. Of all the people that might have a glimpse into what it's like to be an NBA player, you do all this traveling for consulting and speaking, right? Because of blitzscaling, as well as you did Achilles, right? I always mess up the
That's
injury.
right. Achilles, I ruptured my Achilles just 2 weeks after KD ruptured his. So we're on the same timeline.
Yeah. So, and how you? By the way, I forgot to ask pre-show just out of the classic. How you doing on that?
Yeah, I'm doing well. I continue to do physical therapy exercises. I'm still not 100%, but I can run and jump if necessary, and just continue to strengthen and continue to come back.
Yeah, so you definitely have the understanding of, kind of what it's like. And then of course you were grounded for a little bit. And like I said, that made amazing podcast content. And I'm not in the least bit sad when I notice your podcast output slow down. I'm like, that's not a bad thing. It means you're doing
Things
other
got
stuff.
busier,
Yeah.
exactly. But I will get back to it, I promise.
And I mean, if you're hearing this recommendation, that means you haven't heard, and you have an amazing backlog of stuff to listen to. So it's definitely worth a listen.
Awesome. Well,
All right.
Dre and Brian, thank you as always for having me. And in honor of future Laker Hall of Famer Alex Caruso, it's been great being here. Lakers in 6.
All right. I don't disagree with that one, but I'll say Nuggets in 7 if it goes to 3-1. How's that?
Sounds perfect.
All right. Well, this has been the Box Score Geeks show. If you found us not through the website, you can find us at Box Score Geeks. I've been your host, Nerd Numbers, on Twitter. Andres Alvarez Real. Brian Foster, our producer, normal co-host, you can find on Twitter as Box Score Brian. You can find us on twitch.tv/nerd numbers whenever we go live, which is so sporadic we don't even bother saying a start time and date at this point. But you can find recaps on channel Nerd Numbers on YouTube, and then of course find the Box Score Geek show where all fine podcasts are sold. Thanks, Chris. That's been our show. See you next time, and go Nuggets, go Lakers, go everybody, go basketball.
Go Lakers.